The Midnight Man. Today marks my 40th birthday on this earth, and rather than contemplating how to deal with a typical midlife crisis, I'm deciding whether or not my time here has ended. It's sorts of a family curse for as long back as my family tree stretches. The men of the family never make it past the age of 40. It even goes as far as saying each of them died exactly on their birthday. At least that was the case for my father. I was in the middle of college when I got the call. They'd found the athlete of a man lying dead on the front porch from an apparent heart attack on his 40th birthday. My uncle suffered the same fate a couple of years later, as did my brother, who died about 5 years ago. Based on the evidence, I'd say there's some merit to the supposed curse, but as with every rule, there's an exemption. In this case, it's my granddad. Even as a kid, I always look up to him, not only vertically but as a role model. In fact, our birthdays were only a few days apart, so we usually saw each other around that time. He had this aura surrounding him, like an invisible shield that prevented anything malicious from getting too close. Everything he did with a purpose and with an undying smile on his face. Only once did he ever break his perfect facade, at my father's funeral. But even then, he seemed more disappointed than he did sad. Year zero, that's what he called his 40th birthday. For him, it marks the true beginning of his life, creating jokes about his age, claiming he's just turned 5 years on his 45th birthday, and so on. Once I reached adulthood, his demeanor changed ever so slightly as he approached for me what he called some manly advice. He sat me down, handed my first official beer, and started talking. After what happened to your father last year, I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about this so-called family curse. It's not false that all men seem to simply die on their 40th birthday, but it's wrong to call it a curse. In fact, it's more a blessing in disguise. He took a deep breath before continuing. It's going to sound a bit crazy, but I'll tell you anyway. On your birthday, once you turn 40, a man will come knocking on your door at precisely midnight. Despite the odd hour, you feel compelled to let him in. Don't worry, he won't come to harm you. He just wants to talk. And once he has said what he wants to say, he'll offer you a choice. What choice? What's he going to tell me? I asked, confused as to how words could have caused all these deaths. That I can tell you, it's something you have to find out for yourself. All I can do is warn you and tell you to live your life to the absolute fullest for as long as you can. He never brought it up again, and it always lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't bring myself to actually believe it, but I did as he said, and tried to enjoy each aspect of life, believing that once I turned 40, I'd surely perish like the rest of my family. Which brings us today, my 40th birthday. At precisely 12 o'clock midnight, I awoke to what sounded like three soft knocks at the front door. My wife, the lightest sleeper on the planet, didn't even seem to register the intruding noise, while I myself, a usually heavy sleeper, awoke with a startle. I hadn't been sleeping well the days prior to my birthday, anticipating the end of my life, yet unable to believe it. Wearing nothing more than my pajamas, I made my way to the front door. With a slight hesitation, I looked through the people. On the other side stood a middle-aged man in a suit, with a friendly smile in his face. "Mr. Shepherd," he greeted me as he shook my hand. "Mind if I come in?" Speechless, I could do little more than to gesture for him to enter my home. I'd made up my mind long ago to deny him entrance, yet I felt compelled by his presence. He walked past me and headed straight for the kitchen, seeming to already know the layout of my home, a house I'd inherited for my brother. I followed him obediently into the kitchen, and we sat down at the table. He just kept staring me at without speaking a word, his smile never leaving his face. I had a lot of questions, but I couldn't bring myself to ask a single one. We simply sat in silence, looking across at each other, like an awkward and equally twisted blind date. "You seem surprised to see me?" the man finally said after minutes of silence. "I'm assuming you expected my visit." I nodded my head, still unable to speak. "Come on, Mark. You have a perfectly functional tongue. At least, your wife seems to think so. Don't be embarrassed to use it." "Why are you here?" I eventually asked. His smile vanished, replaced with an expression of utter confusion. "Why I'm here? That's the question you want to start with? Not, who am I? Or what I did to your father?" I didn't respond, and he started, my eyes not moving a muscle. "As you wish," he sighs. "I'm here to tell you the answer to each and every question you've ever had. Anything you want to know, I will tell you, no matter how stupid or bizarre of a question it is. I promise you nothing but truth." "Did you kill my father?" "Of course not. That's entirely against the rules. I simply gave him a choice, unlike all the men in your family. Save for your brilliant granddad. He chose to live." "What choice?" "Ah, Mr. Shepherd, or Mark. Do you mind if I just call you Mark?" Before I could answer, he just went on talking. "That's the beauty of our little meeting. I will tell you the answer, but not until I believe you're ready." He leaned back in his chair and waited for me to keep asking questions. True, from the smug look on his face, I could tell he knew exactly what I'd ask. "Who are you?" "Come on, Mark. You don't really have to ask that. You already know, don't you?" I had my theories, and as dumb as I felt they were, it couldn't possibly beat the ridiculousness of the family curse. "Are you Satan?" I asked nervously. Technically, that's correct, but let's not resort to the name calling. I prefer Lucifer, he chuckled. Once again, he fell silent, awaiting my next question, but I couldn't organize the thousand of thoughts flowing through my head. You're really bad at this, you know? Nah, not that it makes a difference. I know exactly what you want to know. You don't even have to speak. So, how about what we started with something innocent? He started deep into my eyes, digging through my brain looking for questions, and I didn't even know I had. Ah, you want to know if your ex-girlfriend still think about you? Julia. That's her name, yes. That's her name, yes. I nodded automatically. She didn't, and you weren't that special to her. And in spite of the pedestal you put her on, you really should appreciate your wife more. She's far more suited for you. My wife? I completely forgotten she's still upstairs sleeping as easy as she was to wake up. She'd surely be suspicious of what the hell I was doing awake with a strange man in the middle of the night. Could we maybe go somewhere else? My wife is sleeping, and I said before being cut off. Mark, don't be ridiculous. Your wife can't hear us. Actually, she's really a light sleeper. He stood up from his chair before screaming, "Oh, Hannah, I'm talking to Mark in the kitchen. I'm just about to tell him all the secrets of the universe. And if you came downstairs, I'll tell you too." He then sat back down and listened for any commotion coming from the room, nothing but silence. I think we're good. By then, most of the adrenaline had settled in my body, and I started to grasp the more advantageous aspect of our conversation. I could ask literally anything and he'd answer me, but I still needed more proof he was for real. Just before my father died, he told me something I've never told anyone else. I didn't understand it at the time, but when he died the next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. He paused for a moment, giving me just enough time to dub him. "Be a better man than me, Mark," he said, but the voice I heard was the only of my father. My heart raced at the familiarity, and Lucifer just smiled in return. All doubt had been stripped away from my mind, so I decided to ask something more otherworldly. If you're real, then surely God exists as well, heaven and all that. He looked truly disappointed in my question. "Oh, Mark, I'm sorry." "Sorry about what?" "To answer your question, of course he's real. Him and heaven and the other truly magnificent creations emerging from his holy powers, but you didn't think he actually created you, did you?" He didn't, I stuttered. "No, not at all. You, humanity, you're nothing more than an unfortunate side effect of God's actual creations. You really think something too horrific could be created by an almighty being. Think about it, Mark. You, you creatures wage a war on anyone even slightly different than yourself. You hoard all of your ultimately pointless possessions, letting some rot in poverty while some thrive beyond what's even remotely necessary. You kill for fun, and in the end, you'll destroy the planet, your own home, just because you're all too selfish to take care of each other. That doesn't sound like something God would create, does it? His words rang through me like an anchor had been attached to my soul and tossed into the deepest part of the ocean. There are good people here too. It's not all that bad, I argued. You're right. There are plenty of good people around here, but none of them are truly great. Not a single one of you is able to see the bigger picture. He stood up his chair and started to pace around as he lectured me on the futile nature of human beings. In the grand scheme of things, nothing you ever do here matters. In the end, you'll all turn to dust floating around in the empty void you've so affectionately called space, he finished. I felt crushed. I thought of my wife, the fact that we'd both one day die, and whatever feelings we had would be erased as the meat on our bones rotted away in the ground. Our jobs, working to provide a function for society, all of it was a pointless task, only serving to extend the inevitable end of our world. So, what happened when you die? He finished my question for me. Yeah, do we end up here? Up in hell? No, just stop existing. The little fragment of divine power within you, the one you think is worth to be called a soul, is harvested by my workers. We need the fragments to make more desirable beings. He paused, reverting his attention toward my fridge. You'll probably need a few minutes to process. Do you have anything to eat? He helped himself to some cold chicken casserole in my wife had cooked as a pre-birthday dinner. So, what do you do then? Since God has left, apparently leaving you behind with the rest of us. He laughed with his mouth full of chicken. A few pieces of meat flying across the room. I didn't stay behind. I chose to remind her. Someone has to make sure you guys don't revolt. You guys keep talking, keep taking things that don't belong. It's only a matter of time before you figure out how to cross over. It's actually ways easier than you might think. And while I'd love nothing more than a revolution, I can't leave just anyone in charge to lead it. He dug through the casserole in a matter of seconds, loudly chewing through the meat, almost moaning of pleasure as he did. Your wife truly is a wonderful cook, Mark. Remember to thank her for me. What do you want from me anyway? I asked. I want to offer you a choice. Before I could clarify the walls around us starting to dissolve, the ground cracked beneath our feet, and every piece of furniture not stuck to the wall fell through the ground. I stood up in panic and looked at Lucifer with pleading eyes. But we didn't fall with the rest, we simply floated. It wasn't long until the world around us had been erased from existence and we stood in a grey, empty void. Where are we? I stuttered. Give me a minute, he said calmly. Building is upward all around us, tall modern architectural masterpiece, colored in bizarre mixtures of silver and blue, all stretching far up into the sky, so uniform nothing to deviating from its neighboring design. This is utopia, Lucifer claimed as we suddenly found ourselves on top of one of the buildings. There were no clouds or fog to, to obscure the view, meaning I could look far into the horizon, seeing that the city truly did stretch on without an end in sight. Utopia? Really? Obviously not. This is my city. I made it some 100,000 years ago. It's what you people call purgatory. Do I prefer to just call it the place in between? He said. You made purgatory? Yep. It's as close as human will ever get to heaven. It's the only place that exists on the same realm at the very last. I look around the street. Thousands of feet below seems to empty, devoid of any people. Where is everyone? In a different section, I keep expanding this place as people flow in. You see, Mark, this is what I offer you, eternal life in this city, or to be erased by time itself in a few decades, quick to be forgotten by the world you once lived in. Why? What do you mean, why? God might have given up on humanity before you were even created, but I still see your potential. Unfortunately, before belief in him still stopped most of you from accepting my offer, but you you are just in the right state of religious mind to be reasonable. You see, I need you all to believe in the glorious afterlife described in your religious books. Just not too much. I could sense the malicious intent behind his offer. If he truly offered eternal life, then surely he wanted something in return. What is this potential you talk about? We're going to take back what ours. Mark, God sure as hell isn't going to give it to you, but I will assume he smiled. Within the next second, I crashed down in my chair, back in my kitchen without warning. We'd return back home. That's the choice I offer you, a chance to live in the Silver City, to have a purpose all of eternity at the tip of your fingers. But that means you'll have to die today and come with me. What about my family? I'm sorry, Mark, but they're not ready. Most of them have been poisoned by their upbringing in religious households. Only a few things of you are suitable for the job. He looked over the clock and on the wall. Time had passed faster than anticipated and morning had just arrived. Well, our time is up. You have today to decide. At midnight, the deal expires, and you return to your self-existence. He started walking out the door, but turned around to give me one final goodbye. Oh, and a happy birthday, Mark. Make sure you really enjoy this one. I felt exhausted after Lucifer left. I'd been giving the ultimate ultimatum of my life. I grabbed a cooler full of beer from the fridge at 7 in the morning and sat myself down on the front porch. An hour later, and 2 beers down, I saw my grandfather strolling down the street, waving at me. He could see the look of defeat on my face. He sat himself down by my side. So, how did the chat go? You did talk to him, right? I just nodded my head in defeat. Why did you choose to stay? I asked. He glanced at the caller behind me before answering. You got another of those for me, kiddos? He asked. I handed him a cold one, waiting for an explanation. I met your grandmother when we were just 18. By then, my father and his father before had both left us, so it's safe to say I was aware of the family curse. But though I didn't learn exactly what happened until much later, I promised myself I'd live my life to live the foolish up until my time came. I figured out I would just die like all the others. So imagine how relieved I was when I was actually given a choice to stay. He took a large sip of his beer, almost finishing it in a single gulp. But why would want to stay? If once we die, there's nothing left on the other side. If nothing here matters, then what's the point? Who to say it doesn't? You just because time is limited, does that really mean it's not important? Besides, if I have to exist in place without your grandmother, I'd rather just cease to exist. When we got married, I promised to stay by her side forever. And that's exactly what I intended to. I look at my granddad in admiration. 83 years of age at the end of his lifespan, yet completely carefree in the charge of his own destiny. What about everything else he said? About God, humanity, the place in between. He looked at me for a moment, pondering his next words. You make your own purpose, Mark. Don't you ever forget that? We talked until my wife woke up. She made my favorite breakfast, invite both myself and my granddad inside. She showed a genuine sense of joy, and I envied her, living life in ignorance of the horrible truth. I smiled as we ate together. The first time since my meeting with Lucifer. He gave me until midnight to choose whether to stay behind and let history wash me away, or to go with him and forever live in the place in between, to serve in a war against God himself. I enjoy this day be the best I can. After all, it might be my last.